The night I found out the truth about my neighbor was the same night I realized how fragile and miraculous life really is. It began on a quiet evening when the world felt unusually heavy, the kind of night when the air seems thick with unspoken worries. I had just stepped onto my porch after another exhausting day, carrying the weight of problems that seemed impossible to solve. Across the narrow walkway separating our houses stood my neighbor, the woman everyone in the neighborhood knew but few truly understood. She was a gynecologist, always calm, always composed, the kind of person who carried herself like she had seen every version of human joy and heartbreak. That night, under the soft yellow glow of the porch lights, she looked at me in a way that felt different, like she had something important to say. But what she eventually told me would change the way I saw my life forever. Before we continue, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who believes in kindness and second chances, and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy emotional stories like this. Also, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. It means the world to us and helps our community grow. At that time in my life, things were falling apart in slow motion. My marriage had quietly ended 6 months earlier, the kind of ending that leaves no dramatic explosion but a lingering silence that echoes in every empty room. I had moved into this small rental house hoping for a fresh start, but instead I found myself drowning in loneliness. Every evening felt the same, long, quiet, and full of thoughts I couldn't escape. The only person who seemed consistently present was my neighbor. Her name was Elena. She lived alone in the modest house next door, though the quiet around her home felt different from mine. Mine felt lonely. Hers felt peaceful. Sometimes I saw her leaving early in the morning wearing her white coat, her hair tied neatly, her expression thoughtful but kind. Other times she returned late at night, clearly exhausted, yet still carrying an unusual calm. I never thought much about it at first. But over time, small interactions began to form a quiet connection between us. It started with simple waves across the yard, then short conversations about the weather, the neighborhood, and the stray cat that liked to sleep near our mailboxes. She had a gentle way of listening that made people feel comfortable, even when they didn't intend to open up. And somehow, without planning it, I began telling her things. One evening, after a particularly rough day at work, I confessed how lost I felt after my divorce. I expected polite sympathy, but instead she listened deeply, the way someone does when they truly understand pain. That moment marked the beginning of something unexpected, a quiet friendship. Weeks passed, and life slowly continued its routine. Yet something about Elena always intrigued me. There was a sadness in her eyes that didn't match her warm smile. She helped bring new life into the world every day, yet sometimes she carried herself like someone who had witnessed too much sorrow. I didn't ask questions until that night. The porch lights glowed softly as the wind carried the faint smell of rain through the air. Elena stood across from me, hands resting casually in her pockets, her expression thoughtful. We had been talking about nothing in particular when the conversation drifted toward her work. That's when she said something unexpected. She told me that people often believed her job was about bringing babies into the world, about happiness and celebration. And while that was true sometimes, she explained that her work also meant standing beside people during the most painful moments of their lives. The way she spoke made it clear that what she was about to say wasn't just another story from work. It was something personal. For a moment, she looked toward the quiet street, as if gathering courage. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if she had changed her mind. But then she began telling me about a patient she once had, a young woman who arrived at the hospital alone, scared and uncertain about the future. The girl had no family nearby and no one waiting for her. Elena explained that she had seen many situations like that over the years. Life isn't always fair, and sometimes people face impossible decisions without the support they deserve. But something about that particular patient stayed with her long after the hospital lights dimmed and the shift ended, because the girl reminded Elena of someone. Herself. When she said that, her voice softened in a way that revealed a story she had probably kept hidden for years. She told me that long before she became a doctor, she had been a frightened teenager facing a future that seemed completely uncertain. At 16 years old, Elena discovered she was pregnant. Her family was strict and traditional, and when they found out, everything changed overnight. The support she desperately needed never came. Instead, she faced judgment, disappointment, and pressure that made her feel like her life was already ruined before it had even begun. But what happened next shaped the person she would eventually become. There was one doctor who treated her with kindness. Just one. That doctor didn't judge her or lecture her. Instead, she simply listened. She explained the options, offered guidance, and most importantly reminded Elena that one difficult moment didn't define an entire life. That compassion planted a seed. Elena told me that after everything she went through, she made a promise to herself. If she ever had the chance to help people the way that doctor helped her, she would dedicate her life to doing exactly that. So she studied harder than she ever thought possible. She worked through exhaustion, doubt, and financial struggles. There were nights she barely slept and days when giving up felt easier than continuing. But every challenge reminded her of that promise. Years later, she became the kind of doctor she once needed. Standing there on the porch, listening to her story, I felt something shift inside me. My problems, though still real, suddenly seemed smaller compared to the strength she had shown to rebuild her life. But the story wasn't finished. Elena explained that the patient she mentioned earlier, the young woman who came to the hospital alone, had reminded her so strongly of her younger self that she couldn't simply walk away after her shift ended. She checked on the girl again the next day, and the day after that. Eventually, that young woman found the courage to continue her life with hope rather than fear. And years later, she returned to the hospital, not as a patient, but as a nurse. Hearing that made Elena smile softly. Because sometimes the smallest acts of compassion ripple outward in ways we never expect. That's when she looked at me with the same thoughtful expression she had when the conversation began. She said something that stayed with me long after the night ended. She said that people often believe life is defined by their worst moments. But in reality, the worst moments are often the turning points that lead to something better. Standing there in the quiet glow of the porch lights, I realized something profound. My divorce, my loneliness, the struggles I thought were breaking me, they might not be endings at all. They might simply be chapters. Time passed differently after that night. The heaviness I carried didn't disappear overnight, but it slowly began to feel lighter. I started focusing on rebuilding instead of dwelling on what I had lost. Sometimes Elena and I still spoke across the yard in the evenings. Other nights we simply waved and continued our routines. But the story she shared stayed with me in ways she probably never realized. Because it reminded me that even when life feels shattered, hope can still grow in unexpected places. And sometimes, the person who helps you see that hope is simply the neighbor next door. If this story has touched your heart so far, please take a moment to like the video and share it with someone who might need a reminder that life can change in beautiful ways. Before we reach the end, I have a special request for you. In the comments, write the word hope if you believe that even the hardest moments in life can lead to something meaningful. Years have passed since that quiet night on the porch, but the lesson remains clear in my mind. Every person carries invisible battles. Every life holds chapters no one else fully sees, yet kindness, sometimes offered by a stranger, a doctor, or even a neighbor, has the power to change someone's path forever. And sometimes the most unbelievable stories are not about miracles or fame. They are about ordinary people choosing compassion when it matters most. If this story moved you, please like, comment, and share the video so more people can hear it. Your support helps spread messages of hope and kindness to those who may need them the most. Because in a world that often feels overwhelming, a single act of understanding can change everything. The months after that quiet night on the porch passed slowly, but something inside me had shifted. Elena's story stayed in my mind like a quiet echo. At first, I didn't realize how deeply it had affected me. Life was still messy. My house still felt empty most nights. The silence after a divorce doesn't disappear easily, but her words about life's worst moments being turning points began to settle into my thoughts like seeds waiting for the right moment to grow. And slowly, they did. Instead of coming home every evening and sinking into the same heavy routine, I started making small changes. Nothing dramatic at first, just simple things that made the days feel less hollow. I began taking evening walks through the neighborhood. I started cooking real meals again instead of surviving on takeout and microwave dinners. Some nights I even sat on the porch with a cup of coffee just to watch the sky fade from orange to deep blue. Those quiet moments reminded me that life was still moving forward, whether I felt ready or not. Elena and I continued our occasional porch conversations. Sometimes they were brief, sometimes longer, but there was always a sense of calm around her. She had a way of speaking about life that made even the most complicated struggles seem survivable. But there was still something about her that I didn't fully understand. She had shared her past with me, yet there were moments when a shadow of sadness crossed her face, like a memory she kept locked away. One evening, nearly 3 months after our first long conversation, I noticed something unusual. Elena returned home earlier than usual, but instead of heading inside, she sat on the steps of her porch. She looked exhausted. Not physically exhausted like after a long shift, but emotionally drained in a way that felt deeper. The porch light cast a soft glow across her face, and for the first time since I had known her, she looked fragile. I hesitated for a moment before walking over. When she looked up, her eyes carried the kind of weight that only comes from witnessing something difficult. That night, she told me about a patient she had lost. It had been a complicated pregnancy, one filled with hope at first, but slowly overshadowed by medical complications. The young mother had fought bravely, and the entire medical team had done everything possible. But sometimes, even the best doctors can't change fate. Elena explained that losing patients was the hardest part of her work. People often imagine doctors as strong, emotionally distant professionals, but the truth was far different. Every loss stayed with her. Every family's grief lingered long after the hospital room was empty again. That particular loss had reminded her of something she rarely talked about. Her own child. The moment those words left her mouth, the air between us felt heavier. She had mentioned her teenage pregnancy before, but she had never explained what happened after. Now she did. When Elena was 16, scared and uncertain about her future, she gave birth to a baby girl. At that time, she had no money, no support system, and no idea how she could provide the kind of life her daughter deserved. It was the most painful decision she had ever faced. Eventually, with guidance from the same compassionate doctor who helped her through that difficult time, she chose adoption. The baby was placed with a loving family who could give her opportunities Elena couldn't provide at the time. As she told the story, her voice remained calm, but the emotion behind it was undeniable. She said the decision broke her heart, yet she believed it was the best way to ensure her child had a bright future. For years afterward, Elena carried that memory quietly. It became the fuel that pushed her through medical school, through sleepless nights, through moments when the path forward seemed impossible. Every life she helped bring into the world reminded her of the daughter she had once held for only a few brief hours. Listening to her story that night, I realized something profound. Elena's strength didn't come from avoiding pain. It came from transforming pain into purpose. The wind moved softly through the trees as we sat there in silence for a while. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of peaceful quiet that allows difficult truths to settle without interruption. Then she told me something unexpected. A few weeks earlier, she had received a letter. It came from a young woman in her early 20s who had recently begun searching for her biological mother. The adoption records had been sealed for years, but through persistence and legal channels, she had finally found a way to reach out. The letter was from Elena's daughter. When she said that, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear, hope, and disbelief. She hadn't opened the letter yet. It had been sitting in a drawer in her living room for nearly 2 weeks. She was afraid of what it might say, afraid that her daughter might resent her, afraid that the life she had built through sacrifice might be seen as abandonment. That fear had kept her from reading it. I remember feeling stunned in that moment. The woman who spent her life helping others face their hardest moments was struggling to face one of her own. But I also understood. Some moments carry so much emotion that even the strongest people hesitate to confront them. Days passed after that conversation. Elena and I didn't bring up the letter again, but I could sense that it weighed heavily on her mind. Then one evening, something changed. I came home from work to find her standing at the edge of our shared walkway. Her expression was different, nervous but hopeful. She had finally opened the letter. The young woman who wrote it didn't express anger or blame. Instead, the letter was filled with curiosity and gratitude. She explained that she had grown up in a loving family who had always told her the truth about her adoption. Rather than feeling abandoned, she felt thankful that her biological mother had made a difficult choice out of love. She wrote that she didn't expect anything from Elena, but she hoped they might someday meet. When Elena finished telling me this, her eyes glistened with tears she had been holding back for years. It was the kind of moment where past and present finally collided. All those years of uncertainty, all those quiet questions about whether she had made the right choice, suddenly had a chance for closure. 2 weeks later, Elena met her daughter for the first time since that day in the hospital. They met in a small cafe halfway between their cities. I remember how nervous Elena was before leaving that morning. She looked like a completely different person from the confident doctor I had always known. She was simply a mother about to see her child again. Hours passed before she returned home that evening, though. When she stepped out of her car, I could see immediately that something beautiful had happened. Her eyes carried a warmth I had never seen before. The meeting had gone better than she ever imagined. Her daughter was kind, thoughtful, and curious about the woman who had given her life. They talked for hours, sharing stories about their lives, their interests, and the strange connection they both felt despite the years apart. They didn't try to force a relationship overnight. Instead, they simply agreed to begin building one slowly. Watching Elena over the following months was like witnessing someone rediscover a missing piece of their soul. She still worked long hours at the hospital. She still faced difficult cases and heartbreaking moments. But there was a new light in her life. Sometimes her daughter visited the neighborhood, and I saw them walking together down the quiet street, talking and laughing like they were making up for lost time. Those moments reminded me of the lesson Elena had unknowingly taught me the night we first spoke on the porch. Life doesn't move in straight lines. Sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the most meaningful outcomes years later. Before we reach the end of this story, I want to ask you something from the heart. If Elena's journey touched you in any way, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who believes in compassion, and subscribe to the channel so more people can hear stories that remind us how powerful kindness can be. And I have a special request. In the comments below, write the word "a second chance" if you believe life sometimes gives us unexpected opportunities to heal old wounds. Looking back now, I often think about how close I came to staying trapped in my own sadness when I first moved into that house. If I had never stepped onto the porch that evening, I might never have heard the story that changed my perspective. Elena thought she was simply sharing a piece of her past. But in reality, she helped me see that broken chapters don't define our entire story. Sometimes they are just the beginning of something we can't yet imagine. And sometimes the most unbelievable truths come from the quiet neighbor next door who reminds us that hope never truly disappears. It just waits patiently for the moment we're brave enough to see it again. If this story touched your heart even a little, please like, comment, and share the video so others can experience it too. Because somewhere out there, someone might be going through their darkest chapter right now, and they might need a reminder that a new beginning could be closer than they think.